Alrighty. Well, welcome to my 2024 sort of recap of what I read this year, or I guess just the my top 10 favorite books I read this year. I'll guess a little backstory before we get into it. Only been reading for about a year and a half now. Well, I've been able to read since a very young age, like most people, but only been reading for fun, I should say, for the last year and a half or so. I was the guy in high school that would spark note everything, and so I read that passage, and looking back on it, it's sort of silly saying that we had a semester to read Siddhartha and I couldn't get through it. It's like 150 pages, and now that's like what I read in 2 days. So all comes full circle. But without further ado, let's get into my top 10 favorite books of 2024. I think this will just be something cool for me to look back on in a couple years' time and see some of the thoughts I had on some of the books I was reading, why I read them, etc., etc. Read 65 books in 2024, so here are my top 10 favorites, sort of in chronological order as to when I read them. I don't really feel like looking through Goodreads to make sure it's accurate, but for the most part it is. So the first book here is Tom Felton's Beyond the Wand. Picked this up because middle of last year when I started reading for fun, like most sane humans, I reread the Harry Potter series for the umpteenth time. But this time, first time as an adult, and I think it struck a chord with me. It was a very pivotal point in my life. I was just graduating college and didn't really know what I was doing, so read the Harry Potter series just for some creature comforts, and later on steered me into this book. I've always loved the Harry Potter movies and all the behind the scenes videos that go along with them, and all sort of like the facts and interesting tidbits, so I thought this would be a cool book to read. I think this was one of the very first books I read this year. I listened to it on audio for the majority of it, while sort of following along in the pages. There are a couple of images in here towards the middle of the book, so looked at those. But the audiobook is cool because Tom Felton himself narrates it, so it's very immersive. And yeah, that was my first favorite book of 2024. Keep things moving here. My second favorite book of 2024 is Mieko Kawakami's All the Lovers in the Night. Translated by, because we got to get our translator kudos here, Sam Bett and David Boyd, originally from Japanese, I believe. And this was sort of my first dip into translated Asian literature, and I loved it. I can't remember too much about the plot, but I don't think the plot is really what this book is all about. I believe, to me, it reads like a novel-length poem. Prose is super captivating. I think I read this in 2 sittings, and you could just fly through this. It's not a very big book, obviously, but it packs a punch. It is about this girl who is sort of in a rut, I should say. I believe she's in her 30s, if I remember correctly, and she's working full-time in the city and feels like she doesn't really have time for much else, and her life is sort of slipping from her grasp, so to speak. And this was a pretty interesting read at the time and point of when I read it, just starting my full-time job out of college. So definitely give this one a shot if that sounds interesting to you. This is Mieko Kawakami's All the Lovers in the Night. Alrighty, Third here is Elena Ferrante's The Story of the Lost Child. I read the whole Neapolitan novel series, all 4 of them, in 12 days. I thought they were captivating. I didn't want to put all 4 of them in my list just to make it interesting, but I think I liked this one the best, and you'll see a theme later on. I like the last book in a series generally the best. I thought the ending of this was very, very good. No spoilers, but if you haven't heard of this novel series, it tells the story of these 2 girls, essentially from early childhood all the way up until death, in 4 novels. It's set in Italy, and that's about all you need to know. It is sort of has something for everyone in it, I believe, and I could not put them down. I didn't talk to my family for 12 days. My girlfriend rarely got a response from me when I was reading these. I just loved all 4 of them, and will definitely be rereading these here, maybe the next couple of years. Maybe they'll be on my 2030 favorite books of the year. Stay tuned for that. Now this probably, if I had to pick one, since we're going in chronological order, this isn't the last one, but still to this day is my favorite book I think I've ever read, and this is Shuggie Bain by Douglas Stewart. I know everything is backwards. I'm new to this thing, so if I can figure out a way to mirror it, then I will, but for now, bear with me. So Shuggie Bain, this is a family drama set in, where is it, Scotland? Yeah, Glasgow, Scotland in the 1980s, in some rundown public housing. It tells the story of a single mother and her family, mainly her youngest son named Shuggie Bain. And much like the Neapolitan novels, it sort of has something for everyone in it. It's heartbreaking. I think this was the only book I cried in all year. The ending is insane, and I still think about it to this day. Definitely give this one a go. Nothing has dethroned it from my favorite book of the year, or I should say my favorite and the best book I've read this year. So this is definitely up for reread contention the next couple of years, much like the Neapolitan novels. All right, we're chugging through these. I see there isn't really any cohesion with what I like to read. I sort of like to read whatever I want to read, and I think that's the way it should be. I don't really stick to one genre. I'm still trying to figure out what I like to read myself. Only been reading for 18 months or so, so this one sort of may seem out of left field. But this is Band of Brothers by Stephen Ambrose. And this tells the story of the 101st Airborne Division in World War II. It's nonfiction, obviously. And basically tells their story from training all the way up until they, spoiler alert, they win the war. Don't think that's a spoiler, but whatever. All the way up until they capture the Eagle's Nest, Hitler's Eagle's Nest, and this details all the battles and all the training, and there's some pictures of the guys in here in the middle as well. What sparked this was I actually watched the mini-series that came out in 2000, Band of Brothers. For those that don't know, I think on IMDb it's the 2nd highest rated show of all time, right behind Breaking Bad, and it is a total dude show, but I loved it, and so I picked up the book and read it for some more details as to some of the things I saw on the show. And it did get a little bogged down sometimes in the details and all the military talk. I liked it. Clearly it's in my top 10 favorite books, but I would definitely recommend maybe watching the show first and then giving this a read, so you sort of can picture what is going on, or maybe read the book first and then watch the show. I don't really care. But yeah, that's Band of Brothers by Stephen Ambrose. Next up here, we got a classic. We got A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. And I loved this book, clearly. This, sort of in the same wavelength of Shuggy Bain, tells a story of a young girl growing up in Brooklyn, obviously, during the 1910s. It's 1902 to 1919, and tells that story of this girl growing up and the hardships that she faces and some of the highlights she faces as well, and it goes into first loves and school and what she did over the summers and things of that nature. And this was very, very enjoyable to read. It was sort of me dipping my toes into some more classic works, so to speak, and I loved it. Listened to a bit of this on audio, same as Beyond the Wand, and did some immersion reading while I followed along. And also get a load of this volume. Look how floppy it is. This made it very enjoyable to read as well. So yeah, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. Next up, this one's sort of a silly one, but love it all the same. This is Us by David Nichols. He wrote One Day, if you guys have heard of that one. And this was very funny to me. I love this book. It tells a story of a man and a woman and their sort of estranged son, as they sort of journey through a fractured marriage, and the father trying to relate to his son more at the same time. So you can tell, maybe I just like reading about broken families and drama. Maybe that's my genre I should pursue going further, but I digress. Starts out in the first chapter with the wife wanting a divorce at the same time that their house is being robbed, so they speak, or so they think. The wife sort of rolls over to the main character, Douglas, and wants a divorce, but Douglas has planned this sort of surprise European tour to show off to his wife and to try to win back the heart of his estranged son at the same time. And so it's very funny, some of the things that they get up to in Europe, and it can be heartwarming at times too, as they sort of relive how they met and how they got to this point that they're at where she wants a divorce, and whether or not that actually comes true, you'll just have to find out. But this is Us by David Nichols. Also listen to this a bit on audio. I usually read the majority of my books rather than listening to them on audio, but this one, with it being a English writer, I guess a British writer, David Nichols, it was narrated by a British guy as well, and he nails some of the timing of the very dry and witty British humor that's in here, which I thought was hilarious. And another good thing is the chapters are very, very short. Some of them are like a paragraph long. There's 180 chapters in this book, but it's less than 400 pages, so very sort of easy to rifle through them. Read one chapter when you're in line at Starbucks or what have you. I like this book through and through, and a very funny book. So that's Us by David Nichols. All right, up next, my spooky read for October was It by Stephen King. I think this was the only book, or I read this and Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson in October, and those were some two chunky books. But not a whole lot needs to be said about it. I had never seen the movies. I don't really like scary movies. I found this at Half Price Books for like $7, and it's in like pristine condition. Oh, wrong way. As you can see, and it still is, because I like to take good care of my books. It's got the person that read it before me broke it in, and it's very nice and floppy, so it made it quite easy to read. But yeah, not a whole lot needs to be said about it by Stephen King. It's a cult classic, I'll call it. Very, very good and very creepy at times. I wouldn't say it's scary. There's some creep to it though, so just be warned. All right, up next, this is more of a recent read. It was in October. This next two were in December. This may come as a shocker if you've read any in this series, but this is Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. This whole year I've been working through the Stormlight archive books, usually about one a month and then a couple books in between to read. And maybe it's just recency bias that I like this one so much, or the fact that I read it in a week. I had surgery. It was wisdom teeth surgery just in the start of December, so I took off work a couple of days and had a long weekend in there. So I read this book in a week, I think 7 days. And maybe that just needs to be what I do for the next book, and the 5 that come after that is just read them faster, but I liked it a whole lot more. I feel like I can remember a whole lot more of what happened once I got to the end of it. And I thought the ending of this was very good, not the best ending. I think I like Words of Radiance ending the best, and maybe I like that book itself is maybe better, but I think I like this one better because I read it faster and I've read it more recently at the time of recording this video. So excited to read Wind and Truth. I plan on reading that in December, not December, it is December, but in January. Once I finish my current 2 books, I think I'll hop into Wind and Truth because I just got it on audio to help me get through that. All right, and last but not least, a shorty. And I may have lied when I said that Shuggy Bane was my favorite book, because I forgot that I put this at the bottom of the pile, but this was my most recent read, so maybe Shuggy Bane beats this out just barely. But this is Heaven, can't read that because it's backwards, but if I can figure out how to turn it around, this is Heaven Has No Favorites by Eric Remarque, same author that wrote All Quiet on the Western Front. That's a classic. They made a movie about it, multiple movies I think. But this book was excellent, one of his lesser well-known books, I would think, translated originally from German. It tells a story of a man and a woman, and they are in life, they sort of both live in the moment and don't necessarily care for if they wake up the next day, or we'll just say they like to live in the moment. The dude is a professional race car driver, and the lady has some illness that she doesn't really know how it will take its course. So the both of them together like to live life in the fast lane, and it turns into this beautiful love story. And there's like all the cars that they talk about in there, and there's a couple of races that go on, and it's just it's like a feel-good book. Well, maybe it isn't a feel-good book. Saying that reminds me of the ending, and I'll leave it at that. It's a feel-good book. No spoilers. But anyways, yeah, this is my most recent read. I think I read this right after Rhythm of War, so maybe 2 weeks ago I read this, and I still think about it. Probably not as much as I do Shuggy Bane, so maybe this will be like my number 2 favorite book of the year. But yeah, that is Heaven Has No Favorites by Eric Remarque. There's no cover because it was I got it at a thrift store. All right. Well, that was my 10 favorite books of 2024. I guess I could go through what I'm reading currently. just down here, I am reading the dichotomy of this. I'm reading Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldree, not Tree. Just sort of a light read. I should finish this tomorrow. I only have not a whole lot left. 40 pages maybe. And at the same time, sorry, I'm reading The Count of Monte Cristo. So talk about opposing forces of what I'm reading. But this one I'm sort of just sinking my teeth in. I'm about a quarter of the way through it. And I'm sort of taking my time with this since it was serialized back in 1844. It came out over the span of like 2 years, and so I'm not rushing through this. But I sort of think I do want to finish it before I read Wind and Truth, so I might have to rush through it just to get to that, because Wind and Truth is staring at me and I need to finish the series before I can sleep comfortably again. But anyways, a bit into what I'm reading at the start of 2025 and some of my favorite books that I've read in 2024. Appreciate everyone sticking around if you have to this point in time. We'll see where this goes, as I might just throw up a video once a month as to what I read, just for my own sake, and just to look back on and see what I've been reading. But yeah, appreciate everyone watching up until this point, and hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thanks.